Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today to learn about the SSAT, everything that you need to know. I am Brenna, and I'm the Director of Education here at Test Innovators. Our webinar today is exactly what it says here. It's focused on everything that you need to know about the SSAT. This webinar is being recorded. Throughout, feel free to type any questions that you have in the Q&A there. If we have time at the end, I'll answer as many of those questions as I can get to. And if there are any we don't get to, we'll review those questions afterwards and respond to everyone who wrote in. I know that there may be several different kinds of people joining today. You may be a parent, a student, you may work with schools that we work with, you may be an administrator, tutor, so many more. If you have any questions that are specific to your situation, please don't hesitate to either send in your question or contact us after the webinar. Again, it's being recorded. We'll send the recording to everyone afterwards. So to begin, a little bit about us, Test Innovators. We are the leading test prep platform for the SSAT and the ISE, and we've helped over 80,000 students get into the most selective schools in the country. In addition, this year, we now work with the Enrollment Management Association, creators of the SSAT, to provide official SSAT practice on our platform. And in regards to the schools that students get into, these are just a few of the schools that students who've used our platform have been admitted to. Based on our years of experience working with students and helping them prepare for their tests, this is what we know. First of all, standardized test taking is a skill that you can learn. These tests, the SSAT, is different from some other tests that students may have taken before. It's like all skills, you have to learn and practice in order to improve. Once you've mastered it, you're able to demonstrate all of your knowledge most effectively on the test, which is ultimately the goal. Additionally, advances in technology have made it far easier to prepare for the test. Technology allows you to quickly identify strengths and weaknesses, and then it provides the best tools to prepare efficiently and effectively. Those two tenets form the foundation of the tools and resources that we've developed to help students prepare for the SSAT, and they also inform the strategies that I'll be sharing with you today in this webinar. The knowledge that has led to our strategies for success comes from a few different places. Part of it is from working with admissions departments at schools, getting to know what they look at as they're reviewing applications. It comes from feedback from students and tutors who've worked with us, and also from data that's collected in our system. And some of the most important information that we have are some official test scores and admissions results. We've compiled all of that data for students and made it available, and I'll include a link to this resource along with the recording after the webinar. This is really important because knowing what scores make you a competitive applicant at your target schools is obviously very helpful as you're preparing and thinking about this test. This is an example of what our school's data looks like. So if your student is interested in this school, they can see at a glance that scores in the yellow or green bands are generally considered competitive. Of course, there are many parts of the application that will influence admissions decisions, but this does give you a good benchmark of the SSAT scores that we have seen or found to make students competitive applicants. For students who work with the Test Innovators platform, we even take it a step further, and you can see your practice test scores in the context of your target schools so you quickly know how you compare. In this example, for the first school on the list, this student's test scores are looking good in the verbal and reading section. Those are in the green, but they may have some work to do when it comes to those quantitative sections. And now, same student, different school, and you can see that their scores aren't quite competitive yet, and they have some more work to do before they take the official test. So with that, let's talk about preparing for the test. Today I'm going to start by talking you through an overview of the SSAT content, and then we'll discuss some test strategies that apply to the entire test. After that, I'll delve into each section and highlight some strategies specific to each of them, and that will include talking about the SSAT essay and why it's so important. With that, let's get started. So general information about the SSAT. Schools use the SSAT to assess whether a student is a good fit at their school. Largely, looking to see how they'll handle the academics. But something you may not know is they also are looking for some information about how students fit in socially, which is where the essay comes in, and I'll talk about that more a bit later. There are 5 main sections to the test: the verbal section, reading section, 2 quantitative sections, and then a writing sample. And in addition, it's worth noting that there's also a 15-minute mixed question type section that comes at the end of the test for anyone who's taking it with standard time. And it's important to know that that's not scored. So that's not going to show up in terms of any of the statistics or scores that students see at the end, but it's good to know that you have another 15 minutes at the end of taking the whole test that you'll be doing this extra experimental section. The test can be taken multiple times. Our recommendation is to sign up for 2 testing dates, and that way the first test date can serve as a bit of a trial test. If it goes well, that is great, and you can be done. However, if there's any room for improvement, if you happen to get sick, it's not your best day, then you still have some buffer room because you still have time and you have another testing date that's set up, or that you can register for that test. And last but important note is that the SSAT is only administered on paper, which basically becomes especially relevant when it comes to preparation. It is always worth practicing in the same format that you'll be taking the official test. So we always recommend that students spend some time at least taking a paper practice test and working with that bubble sheet just to make sure it's second nature. Again, in terms of some of the basics about the test, there are 3 levels of the test. There's the elementary level, which is for application to grades 4 and 5. The middle level of the test is for application to grades 6 through 8. And the upper level is for application to grades 9 through 12. Notice that there is a grade range for every single level of the test. So how does it get scored? Scoring is normative according to grade, which means that students are only compared to other students the same age. So someone applying to 9th grade is not being compared to someone who's applying to 10th or 11th or 12th grade. Even though they're all taking the same test, you're only being compared to other students applying for 9th grade. A little bit about what the test looks like. The middle and upper levels of the test, 2 hours and 35 minutes for those standard parts. There are 2 breaks during the test. You get a 5-minute break after the writing sample, which is the first section, and then a 10-minute break after the reading section, which is the third section. And overall, you answer 150 questions plus the writing prompt. And all of those other questions except the writing prompt are multiple choice questions with 5 answer choices. Elementary is a bit shorter, so it's 1 hour and 35 minutes. You get 1 break. It's a 15-minute break after the second section. And again, a little bit shorter, 88 questions plus a picture prompt. Same deal with the multiple choice questions, though. You have 5 answer choices for all of those. So now that you know a bit about the test, let's talk about the preparation process. There are many factors that will go into determining your student-specific preparation plan. And that will include a few things. In how well the student knows the material initially, how much time you have to prepare. If your test date is in a week, that's very different from having a test date in 2 months. Time management also plays a critical role in this because that can impact how much practice you may want to do, is how well or easily you can move through all of the questions in the sections of this test in the allotted time. And also another important piece of information here will be how many times you may be taking the official test, as that can sort of change where your different targets are and what your timing is going to look like. Depending on where your test dates are, some of you may have a test that's coming up relatively soon, or you may be taking the test in December or January. I'll be talking a little bit about how to prepare in each of those scenarios. Regardless of where you are and what your test day might be, the first step in every preparation process is always the same, and that is to take a full-length practice test or a benchmark. Essentially, that will serve as your baseline as you go into your practice. It has a few important benefits. Taking that practice test, no matter when your test date is, it gives you familiarity with the test style, difficulty, and content so that you know what to expect. It also, as I said, serves as a baseline. It allows students to identify strengths and weaknesses so that they know how to spend their practice time. So familiarity is important. Find your strengths and weaknesses. Some of the things to look for in the results of that first practice test and practice tests all along the way, wherever you are in your process. Were there concepts that you didn't know? Did you manage your time effectively? Or were there sections where you ran out of time and didn't have a chance to get to the last questions? Did you use any strategies like using process of elimination instead of just picking the right answer when you knew it? So the first step is to take a practice test. Where do you find those? There are a wealth of practice tests that are out there. So there are a few things that are important to think about as you're choosing where you're getting your practice materials from. So important things, make sure that the tests are an accurate reflection of current test material. Obviously, this is the most important thing. If you are not practicing what you'll see on the test, it's going to be far less helpful to you. It's really helpful to have quick scoring so you can really see where you stand as you go along and know where you are, where you want to be. Timing data, also very important. That can help you with time management, which, as I said, is a really important part of this test because you have sections where a lot of questions are crammed into a relatively short time. So knowing how to manage your time effectively is a big piece of this. Obviously, one place that you can find this is at Test Innovators. And if evaluating other test practice possibilities, these are things to keep in mind. Speaking about timing, this is what it looks like on our platform. We show students exactly how they allocated their time on every section. Effective time management, as I mentioned, is critical to being successful on the SSAT. So a graph like this graph shows exactly how long the student took on each question. So questions are on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. So how long they spent on every question, their trajectory through that section. So you can see that this student went through every question of the section and then they returned and they checked their work for most of the questions. Being able to see things like this provides insights that are critical to help students become effective test takers and also helps to foster a reflective process for learning. So all that said about getting started with preparation, let's talk about some strategies. And there are two important strategies to know that apply across the entire test. And the first of those relates to the wrong answer penalty, which you may have heard about, already thought about. On the SSAT, you receive a 1/4 point deduction for wrong answers. So 1 point for a correct answer, 0 points for a blank answer, and 1/4 point deduction for wrong answers. Our recommendation on the test is to answer every question. There are several reasons for this, and we can send along more information that really details this. Essentially, mathematically, your expected value, the expected number of points you'll get if you leave things blank or if you guess on questions is exactly the same. But the benefits to students in terms of boosting confidence by simplifying test strategy, also thinking about the bubble sheet and how easy it is to get off if you're skipping questions. If you don't skip questions, it's a lot easier to make sure that you're in the right place on your bubble sheet and not make mistakes there. Also, and especially, any time that a student has eliminated any answer choices, they've increased their chances of earning points by guessing. The second strategy that applies across the entire test is time management. And this is pretty straightforward. Essentially, it's good to think of the questions in any given section in two groups, the easy questions and the hard questions, and note that this is very student specific. What's an easy question for one student may be a hard question for another student, and vice versa. So a given student, an easy question is a question that they see and they know exactly how to approach it, they know how to answer it, and they're able to do it in a relatively short time span. Hard questions are those questions that you look at and maybe you're not sure what they're asking about. Maybe you know how to do it, but you know that it might take you 5 minutes to do it, something like that. Those are sort of the hard questions. So what you do first as you go through the section is always to answer the easy questions. Get through all the questions that you know exactly how to do, and then just come back to those hard questions with any remaining time. Important note, again, about the bubble sheet is whenever you're skipping questions, be very careful with your bubble sheet to make sure that you did not get off. With that, let's jump into the sections, and we'll start with the verbal section. The verbal section, for the middle and upper levels of the test, you have 60 questions to answer in 30 minutes. Elementary level of the test, you have 30 questions to answer in 20 minutes. So you can see for the middle and upper level of the test, it's very fast. Luckily, all of the questions in this are pretty quick questions. You don't have to read a lot to answer these. There are 2 types of questions in this section. The first half is synonyms, the second half is analogies. And here's an example of what a synonyms question can look like. Essentially, for middle and upper, students will have to answer 30 questions that look like this. These are known as the synonym questions. A student has a single word they're given, it's written in all caps, and then they choose the best synonym from among the 5 answer choices. And this is about the difficulty you would expect to see on the upper level of the test. Strategies for the synonyms portion is always to cover up the answer choices first. The reason that you cover up the answer choices is so that you can come up with your own answer before you read those answer choices and think about what this word actually means. It does not have to be a perfect definition. It can be anything that comes to mind. It might be a word, could be a phrase, it could be the context or a sentence in which you might have heard this when people talk about it. It could be a feeling associated with the word. Whatever you come up with, put that down. This will help you avoid tempting wrong answers. So oftentimes there are some wrong answers that might be related types of words, related concepts, but they don't really have the same core meaning as that given word that you're looking at. And coming up with your own answer first is a good way to avoid those. After you've come up with your own answer, find the answer choice that's closest to yours. Now, of course, the synonyms portion of the test also relies heavily on knowing a great deal of vocabulary. Depending on how much time you have to prepare, what you do here may be different. So if you don't have much time before your test, the best thing to spend your time doing is just practicing that strategy. Focus on coming up with your own answer first, avoiding tempting answer choices. Don't spend too long on words you really don't know. You can try breaking words apart, see if you can find roots. Do things like that, but don't worry too much about trying to cram vocabulary in a week, something like that. However, if you do have some time to prepare, studying vocabulary is a very good idea. It's a good idea to make sure that the vocabulary you use is at the appropriate level. Learning roots can also be very helpful because that way you can break words apart and one root can apply to many different words. As you study these words, be sure to practice as well and continue practicing with actual test style questions because of course that's ultimately the format in which you'll be answering synonym type questions. And essentially recommendation for studying vocabulary is just to incorporate it a little bit every day. And if you have anything 2 weeks or more before your official test, it's really a good idea to incorporate some vocab study into that. The second half of the verbal section are analogies, and this is what those look like. The strategy for analogy questions is really to hone your ability to find the relationship between the first pair of words by forming a phrase or sentence that connects them, and then apply that relationship to the second pair of words to see which fits. So for instance, let's take a look at this one. It says, communication is to telephone as storage is to, and then I have 5 answer choices. So for this one, the sentence I might come up with is something like, a telephone is something used for communication. If I then apply that relationship to the second pair, I am trying to find something that is used for storage. So telephone is used for communication. What is used for storage? And I'd say, well, a locker is used for storage, so C must be the correct answer. With these, the primary strategy is just that, to find the relationship between the first pair of words, apply it to the second pair of words, and select the answer choice for which the relationship holds. While the synonyms portion of the verbal section really relies pretty heavily on knowledge of words and vocabulary, the analogy questions are much more skill-based. And many students haven't encountered many analogy questions before coming to the SSAT. So learning how to form this bridge, this relationship between the words, and practice that a great deal is the best way that you can prepare. And this is a place where you can make some significant difference, often just from practicing somewhat intensively for whatever time you have before your test. A few other things worth noting about analogies, some tips for these. So especially if you're not always sure about the words, some things that will make a difference and will help you get the correct answer. Pay attention to the order of the words. Talk is to shout is not the same as shout is to talk. So the order between the two should always match from the given question to the correct answer choice. Also pay attention to parts of speech, which should also match. So make sure that whatever is in the original question matches the answer that you are choosing. The types of analogies that show up in general, you have synonym analogies, so that's where they mean the same thing. Kind is to compassionate. Antonyms, or opposites, loud is to quiet. Degree is where one is sort of a greater degree of the same thing. So stomp is to tiptoe. Both of these are a form of walking. Stomping is a heavier, louder, stronger form of this. In some ways, tiptoe is the quieter, lesser form. Cause and effect, so rain causes a flood. Definition or purpose of an object would be something like a mop is used to clean. You have part-whole relationships, so a chapter is part of a book, or many chapters make up a book. Type or kind, that's something like an ape is a type of primate, and characteristic is something like soda is to bubbly, so bubbly is a characteristic of soda. With that, let's jump into our next section and look at the quantitative sections. For these, for the middle and upper levels of the test, students have 2 quantitative sections. Each of those is 25 questions in 30 minutes. For the elementary level, there's just 1 quantitative section, and it's 30 minutes for 30 questions. The subjects that show up on these quantitative sections always start by relying a strong foundation in arithmetic. It is a very good idea. Students should be comfortable with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with positive and negative integers, fractions, and decimals. If those are not entirely perfect, or there's anything that a student may not remember about how to work with negatives, how to work with fractions, this is always a good starting point to review those, because they show up across a lot of the math questions. And even if you're looking at an algebra question that has variables in it, it may also have fractions, and so you'll still need to use that. Many questions do require, as I mentioned, strong algebra skills. So working with variables to solve equations, simplify expressions, and many word problems. Geometry shows up, probability and statistics also appear. The best way to really learn the types of questions you can be asked on the test is to take a practice test. They will really show you the types of questions from each of these subjects that can appear on the test, and then you can determine which specific subjects you may need to review or study to have a good foundation in them going into the test. Just to take a quick look at the types of questions that students can see on the test. Some of the questions on the SSAT look quite different from questions that students may have seen before in school and are not necessarily part of, say, a standard curriculum. So getting comfortable with those, familiar with those, so you don't freeze up when you see something you might not be extremely familiar with, is a really good idea, just in terms of, again, familiarity and comfort going into the official test. This question is the type of question you might see on the upper level SSAT. If we read it, it says, if n is between 0 and 1, so 0 is less than n is less than 1, which of the following is the greatest? And then each of our answer choices is an expression that has n in it. Just looking at this, it may look fairly hard, abstract, conceptual, and like I'm going to have to evaluate a lot of variable expressions. However, to make this easier, just pick a value. If we let n equal 1/2, which is a number that's between 0 and 1, I can just calculate each of these, and they go from being something that, especially if your algebra skills are less strong, might be tricky, to simply calculating with numbers. So, important thing is to remember that you can always use numbers. If you know that n is between 0 and 1, just picking a value is a really good strategy for questions like this. In terms of overall preparation strategy for the quantitative sections, the first thing to think about, especially if you have limited time before your official test, is really just to familiarize yourself with the test, with the types of questions you'll be asked, and focus on reviewing content that you had seen before but may be rusty. Remember that the SSAT is covering all of the math material that you've covered in school since essentially the beginning of time. So there may be things that you have not seen for a few years and you've forgotten exactly how to do them. Starting there is a good place because it won't take as long for you to brush up and be able to answer those effectively. And then just focus on, again, that time management skill of skipping the unknown questions. Don't spend too much time on a question that you really aren't sure how to do. For any of you who have more time to prepare, it is also a good idea to study some new content. So if you're seeing some questions that you're not sure how to do, you can always learn how to do those. So for instance, with Test Innovators, we have answer explanations for all of our questions. We have extra follow-up practice. We have links to extra external resources so that you can learn some of these things that maybe if there happen to be some subjects you haven't covered in school yet, you can always launch into those. And of course, as always, the theme of the whole preparation process. As you study, make sure that you're practicing so that you're actually answering those types of questions and getting really comfortable answering them. Some of the most important tips and strategies that I have for the math section really comes down to being careful. The number of mistakes that students tend to make simply from being slightly careless as they're going through these can be astronomical. So this is always the best starting point. Make sure that you read questions carefully so you don't mess something up that you actually know how to do because you don't do this. Underline the important words and numbers in the question. That's a good way to make sure you're keeping track of the information you need. Pay attention to the units. If it is giving you a lot of measurements in feet and then asks for the answer in inches, make sure that you give an answer in inches. Drawing a picture is a good way. If you're having trouble figuring out what a question is asking about, drawing a picture will help you potentially visualize what's going on, what's happening there. As I'm sure most students have heard in school, it's a very good idea to write your work down. You're far less likely to make mistakes if you are writing it down rather than trying to keep it all in your head. And last but not least, every question after you finish solving, take 2 seconds to check what you're supposed to find. Majority of the time, you'll probably find that you did in fact calculate the correct thing. But for those handful of times that you say, oh, whoops, I was supposed to calculate oranges instead of bananas, and I found the number of bananas, then you have an opportunity to fix that. So it's well worth those 2 seconds to just always get in the habit of checking this. And then a few very powerful reasoning things to think about in the quantitative sections is to remember that you're taking a multiple choice test, and estimation is a very powerful tool. If you can ballpark what you think the right answer has to be using logic and numerical reasoning, you can say, oh, I know that it must be positive, or I know it must be negative. I know it has to be a big number, it's in the thousands versus in the hundreds. Anything like that that lets you eliminate answer choices is increasing your chances of getting points. You also can work backwards from answer choices sometimes. So if there's a variable or unknown quantity in the question, you can substitute answer choices. You know one of them has to be right until you find the one that works. And last, and this is essentially the strategy we used on that previous question, which was just to pick values to substitute. So if you have a variable and you're trying to figure out how the question works, pick a number, stick it in, see what happens. And that brings us to the reading section. So for the middle and upper levels of the test, you have 40 questions to answer in 40 minutes. There are roughly 8 reading passages. Elementary, you have 28 questions in 30 minutes. Time management can be more difficult for the reading section often than for some of the others because you have to both read the passages and answer all of the questions. And at times the passages may be long. If you have trouble reading quickly enough to answer all the questions, practice skimming the passages to find the most important information. Underline that. But also know that it's generally better to get through most of the test taking your time and really answering every question carefully and correctly than it is to rush through the entire section and end up missing most of the questions. As always, it comes back to practice. Practice and find the balance that works best for you. The speed where you can answer questions correctly, but also get through as much of the section as possible. Some other important strategies to keep in mind with this section: to identify the main point. So as you read a passage, after you're done, always ask yourself, so what? And put in your own words, whether it's on paper or just in your head, what you think the main point of the passage was. That will help you with every question on the passage. It will shape how you find correct answer choices and eliminate answer choices that aren't in line with the point of the passage. Perhaps most important strategy for reading is always to have evidence for the answer choice that you are picking. If it is the right answer, there must be evidence in the passage that says that that is true. You're only using information from the passage, no external knowledge. And last, similar to the synonym questions in the verbal section, always think of your own answer before reading answer choices, again, just so that you have formulated your own idea of what the correct answer is before looking at those other ideas. A couple answer choice strategies that you can use for this section also are to watch out for extreme answer choices, words like only, always, never, none, best, worst, things like that. Usually the authors of these passages are fairly moderate. So only pick these answer choices if you really see it exactly in the passage. Be wary of these. Second, make sure that the specificity of the question matches the specificity of the answer choice. What does that mean? That means that main idea questions should have a general answer. It's something that encapsulates the entire passage, but a detailed question is going to be more specific. And that brings us to the last section of the test, which is the writing sample of the SSAT. There are 2 different types of prompts that you may see, a creative versus a personal. For the elementary, students get a 15-minute picture prompt. Middle level has 2 creative prompts, both, and you get 25 minutes to write about the one that you choose. And upper level, you have 1 creative prompt and 1 personal essay prompt, and again, 25 minutes to write on that. This portion of the test is the only ungraded section of the test. And for that reason, it always gets a lot of questions. The way it works is that a copy of your writing sample is sent to schools along with your test scores on the other sections. And admissions departments use it as an indicator of students' writing ability and a bit about how they'll fit into the school community academically and personally, thinking about what the student chose to write about. Notably, while application essays can be edited, potentially, by parents, tutors, siblings, friends, the SSAT essay writing sample is truly a pure sample of a student's writing. There's nobody else there with the student as they write. And that makes it an important part of the SSAT because it demonstrates a great deal about the student in terms of what they're choosing to write about and how well they express those thoughts. Some big things to keep in mind as you're doing your essay. So we'll talk about the personal essay and the creative prompt slightly differently, though there's much in common. Always start by outlining. Spend, a few minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, outlining. This is really important. You're going to write down what your main idea is, what your supporting ideas are, and also the details and examples that you're going to use in each of those body paragraphs. Throughout your writing sample, make sure that you're staying focused on your main point. You give good supporting details throughout. That's what's going to make your writing come alive, and really give you an opportunity to give examples from your life and your experience about whatever your topic is. And perhaps most importantly, express yourself. The point of the writing sample is for schools to learn more about you and what you care about, so you want to let them get to know you. Through all this, of course, you want to present yourself in the best possible light, so do avoid anything that could possibly be construed negatively by the reader. And last but not least, last few minutes of the essay should always be devoted to editing your writing, where you check your mechanics, the spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, and make sure that your writing is as smooth and polished as possible. When it comes to creative writing, as I said, there's much in common here. You'll start by outlining. At this point, you'll pick your main conflict and who your stories are, who your characters are, what the setting is, so that you essentially know what you're going to write about before you get started. You know how it's going to end. Notably for both of these, you really don't want to be caught not having finished your personal essay or creative writing story when the time comes up. It is a very important piece of this to make sure that in that 25 minutes or 15 minutes for elementary level, you really can finish your whole piece of writing. The creative writing sample should have a beginning, middle, and end. You introduce things, you arrive at your conflict, and then you also want to be able to wrap things up and tie it with a bow. Again, descriptive details are very important to make your story come alive for the reader. Personality is still coming through here, so choose a story, characters, and events that say something about you and what's important to you. Again, anything that could possibly be construed negatively, probably not the best idea to write about that in this particular context, just because of the way that someone might interpret it when they're reading it later. And last, again, always edit. Edit your writing to make sure it's polished. With that, we have now gone through a great deal of information about every section of the test. So bringing it back overall to the arc of what the preparation process should look like, students should always be starting with a full-length practice test, finding their strengths and weaknesses, seeing what they need to work on the most, looking at what their target scores are and thinking about what that growth will be. Then focus on learning anything that you need in terms of content, strategy, skills across the test for any given sections, and then repeat the process. Practice those questions, and once you've practiced all the skills from that first test, take another practice test. Use those as benchmarks along the way as you go up to your official test to mark your progress and see what you need to work on next. Throughout the process, we are here to help. You can visit our site, ssatpracticetest.com, and you can always reach out to us. Our support team contact information is this email address and this phone number. And I'm just going to give a minute here to see if anyone has any questions, and feel free to, again, just send those over through the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer any of them. Or you can always email afterwards, and we'd be happy to answer questions that way as well. And I'll just give it a minute here, and if not, I will thank you all for joining again, and best of luck in the preparation process. I hope it goes well for all of you, and if there's anything you need at any point, please don't hesitate to reach out.